quiet pain that love can't cover. There comes a season in life that no one quite prepares us for. It's not marked by birthdays or anniversaries, but by a quiet realization. The dynamic with your children has shifted. You raised them, taught them, stayed up nights worrying for them. You gave up dreams, time, energy, all with love. But now, something unspoken lingers in the air. Maybe they dismiss your opinions, ignore your calls, or speak to you in ways they never would have years ago. Not cruelly, but carelessly, as if you've somehow become less. And that hurts deeply, because you haven't stopped loving them. But maybe, just maybe, they've stopped seeing you clearly. If you've ever felt this quiet ache, you're not alone. Many parents, especially as they age, carry this invisible grief, not of loss, but of slow erasure. Not because their children are bad, but because life moves fast, and aging often makes us feel left behind. But here's something no one says out loud. Respect isn't something you can demand. It's something you can quietly reclaim, not through guilt, not through arguing, but through grace, dignity, and rediscovering your own worth separate from their approval. In today's video, I'll walk with you through deeply personal reflections and quiet shifts that can transform how your children see you, and more importantly, how you see yourself again. These are not dramatic confrontations. They are gentle, powerful turns of the heart. If you've ever felt this shift in your family, comment 1 below. If not, comment 0. I truly read every response, and if this message touches something in you, please consider subscribing and turning on the bell, so you and I don't lose each other on this journey. Let's begin. Number 1, the shift you didn't see coming. It wasn't one moment, it was 100 small ones. And by the time I noticed, it had already changed. A retired nurse describing the fading respect from her children. There's something uniquely disorienting about change that creeps in quietly. It doesn't arrive with a loud argument or a dramatic break. Instead, it sneaks into the way they speak to you, the hurried tone on the phone, the way they interrupt, the look of slight impatience when you share a memory. You might brush it off at first. They're busy. They didn't mean it. But deep down, something stirs. A whisper that says, this is different. One woman I once met, let's call her Janice, had 3 children she adored. She'd been a single mother, worked 2 jobs, and never missed a school event. In her later years, she looked forward to Sunday dinners, phone calls, and little moments of closeness. But those dinners started happening less. The calls got shorter. One day, when she reminded her son to drive safely, he laughed and said, "Mom, you always worry too much. You don't have to parent me anymore." He meant no harm, but Janice felt something break quietly inside her. Not because of what he said, but because of what she heard, your role is over. That's what stings the most, the gradual sense that you become unnecessary. But here's what I want to say to you. From one soul to another, you are not less important because you are less needed. Let that sink in. The value of a parent doesn't vanish when the child grows up. It only changes shape. Respect doesn't always disappear because of anger or distance sometimes. It fades because we don't even realize we've allowed it to. We confuse love with silence. We confuse peace with giving up our voice. So if you felt this shift, please know you're not imagining it, you're not alone, and most importantly, you're not powerless. In the next part, we'll explore why trying harder to be appreciated can quietly make things worse, and how choosing your own dignity may be the most loving thing you ever do for both yourself and your children. Let's walk there together. Number 2, stop chasing approval. Start living truthfully. The moment I stopped trying to be the mother they expected, I became the woman they respected. A quiet realization from a grandmother in her 70s. It's a tender trap, isn't it? We want our children to love us, but more than that, we want them to see us. So we try a little harder. We say yes when we'd rather say no. We stay quiet when they interrupt. We cancel our plans to accommodate theirs. just to feel a moment of closeness, all in hopes that maybe they'll notice. They'll say thank you. They'll remember how much we still matter. But here's a quiet truth. The more you seek their validation, the more invisible you become. It's not their fault. It's human nature. When someone constantly gives without boundaries, it stops feeling like a gift. It starts feeling expected. And respect begins to fade, not out of cruelty, but out of familiarity. I once met a woman named Linda at a community event. She was warm, giving, always the first to offer help. But in her words, I don't know who I am outside of being a mom. She rearranged her entire week around her daughter's requests, babysitting the grandkids, helping with errands, always available yet rarely appreciated. And when she once asked if they could have dinner just because she missed them, her daughter replied, "Mom, I'm swamped. You always want something." Linda wasn't asking for much. She was asking to be seen. But in trying so hard to please, she had slowly erased herself. So she tried something quietly radical. She stopped bending, not with anger, but with grace. She started saying, "I'm not available that day." She began painting again, something she hadn't done since her 20s. She stopped asking for time and instead started valuing her own. And slowly, her children began to treat her differently, not because she demanded it, but because she carried herself differently. That's the secret. Respect doesn't bloom from sacrifice. It blooms from self-worth. You don't need to earn your child's respect by shrinking. You earn it by standing tall, even in silence, by living truthfully, not as the parent you used to be, but as the whole person you are becoming. As we continue, I'll show you how reclaiming your emotional independence isn't a rejection of love. It's the very foundation of being truly seen. Number 3, emotional independence is the new freedom. There comes a moment in every parent's life when love alone is no longer enough to hold the relationship in balance. Not because that love has faded, but because it has been poured so generously for so long that somewhere along the way, it began to overflow and drown the self beneath it. Many older parents don't realize how deeply their emotional world still depends on their children. A delayed phone call ruins their day. A missed visit feels like rejection. Even small acts of forgetfulness are translated into painful signs of being unimportant. This kind of emotional attachment feels like love, and in many ways, it is. But when your peace is tied entirely to another's behavior, especially your children's, you unknowingly hand them the reins to your self-worth. And over time, this imbalance becomes heavy not just for you, but for them. Children begin to feel the weight of unspoken expectations. They may not have the language for it, but they sense it that your happiness rises or falls based on their attention, their presence, their approval. And when they sense that, something quiet shifts. They begin to withdraw, not because they don't love you, but because emotional dependence feels like pressure, and pressure rarely invites closeness. That's why reclaiming your emotional independence is not a betrayal of love. It is an act of deep respect for yourself and for them. When you begin to cultivate peace that isn't dependent on who calls or visits, when you find joy in your own rhythm, confidence in your own path, and stillness in your own soul, you become lighter, you become free, and your children will feel that shift, not in words, but in energy. They will begin to see you again, not as someone waiting in the shadows of their lives, but as someone quietly full and whole. This is emotional maturity in its most radiant form, and it's one of the greatest gifts you can offer, not just to yourself, but to the very children you love most. In the next part, we'll explore how setting gentle yet firm boundaries without guilt can help you protect this newfound freedom and teach others how to treat you with the respect you deserve. Number 4, graceful boundaries. The lines that heal, not hurt. Once you begin to reclaim emotional independence, there comes another quiet step, drawing the lines that protect your peace. Boundaries are not walls and they're not ultimatums, nor are they punishments. They are acts of self-respect, gentle, clear reminders of how you deserve to be treated. Many parents of adult children struggle here. They fear that if they assert themselves, they'll cause conflict or distance. So instead, they remain silent when spoken to harshly. They allow interruptions, dismissive tones, unmet commitments, all in the name of keeping the peace. But here is a truth worth sitting with. Peace that costs your dignity is not peace, it's quiet pain. When you let others cross the same line over and over again, you don't teach them to love you more. You teach them that your needs don't matter. And over time, the result isn't closeness. It's erosion, slow and silent. Setting boundaries doesn't require confrontation. It requires clarity. It's saying, with calm and kindness, I'm happy to help, but I need notice. I'd love to talk, but not if I'm going to be shouted at. I want to spend time together, but I also need rest. These are not selfish statements. They are invitations to meet one another in mutual respect. When you state your needs and hold them gently but firmly, even when it's uncomfortable, you give others a roadmap for how to honor your presence. And yes, some may push back. They're not used to the change. But eventually, they'll begin to understand you are not setting boundaries to create distance. You are setting boundaries to preserve connection. The most sacred relationships are not the ones where anything goes. They're the ones built on truth, mutual regard, and emotional safety. And that safety begins with you, with how you speak to yourself, with how you allow others to treat you, with how gently but clearly you say, "This is where I begin, and this is where I end." In the next part, we'll explore what happens when you continue to give endlessly to those who no longer acknowledge your efforts and how to lovingly break free from that cycle without guilt or resentment. Number 5, your time is a gift. Don't give it away for free. There's something sacred about your time, especially now, in this season of life, when each day feels more precious and each moment carries a quiet kind of meaning. Yet somehow many older adults find themselves giving their time again and again to people who don't truly value it. And more often than not, those people are their own children. It begins so innocently. A request for help, a last-minute favor, a call that starts with, "Can you do me a big favor, Mom?" And of course, your heart says yes, because that's what love does. It shows up. It fills in the gaps. It gives. But here's where the quiet danger begins. When you give without recognition and keep giving anyway, your giving starts to lose its meaning, not for you, but for them. When your time is always available, it stops being seen as a treasure. It becomes a given, expected, automatic. And one day, you realize something painful. They no longer say thank you. They just assume you'll do it. And when you don't, you're met not with understanding, but with confusion, frustration, even guilt tripping. That's the moment your kindness turns into a burden. Not because you've changed, but because the lines were never drawn. Here's a truth to hold close. Your time is not an obligation. It is a gift, and gifts should be received with gratitude. When your time is offered, it should feel sacred. And when it's received, it should be honored, not just taken. But in order for that to happen, you have to be the one who teaches it. You do that not by lecturing or withdrawing love, but by pausing, reflecting, and then choosing consciously when and how to give. It's okay to say no. It's okay to say, "I have plans that day." It's okay to say, "I'd like to help," but only if it's needed and appreciated. That's not cold. That's clarity. Because here's something powerful. The moment you begin to treat your time as valuable, others will start to do the same. You'll notice something shift. At first, they may react with surprise, even frustration, not because you've hurt them, but because they've grown used to having unlimited access to your time. But slowly, the tone will change. They'll start asking instead of assuming. They'll thank you more. They'll recognize that your help is not a right, it's a privilege. And you'll begin to feel something return to you, your energy, your balance, your sense of self. Because every time you protect your time, you reclaim your identity. This isn't about withdrawing love. It's about loving in a way that's healthy for everyone, including you. Because love without boundaries becomes martyrdom. And no parent was born to be a martyr. You were born to love, yes, but also to be loved, to be respected, to be seen. So if you found yourself constantly giving to children who no longer say thank you, if you feel like your efforts are invisible, take this as a gentle reminder. You are not a machine. You are not a service. You are a human being whose time still matters. And when you start to believe that, truly believe it, others will begin to treat you like someone whose time is worth honoring. In the next part, we'll shift focus to something just as vital. Not just what you give, but how much of your life you've built around your children, and what happens when you gently reclaim your center. Number 6, the life beyond family. Creating a new center. There's a quiet truth many older parents don't speak out loud, but feel in the soft ache of their hearts. I don't know who I am if I'm not needed. After a lifetime of giving, caring, managing, and showing up, especially for your children, it can feel almost disorienting to consider a life that centers around you. Not your role as mother or father, not your usefulness, but your spirit, your joy, your curiosity, your growth. And yet this may be the most important shift of all, because while the early decades of life are about building and nurturing others, these later years offer something sacred, the invitation to come home to yourself. When your children were young, they were your priority, as they should have been. But now they are adults. They have their own orbit, their own center, their own lives. And if you've built your world entirely around them, it's no wonder you feel shaken when they begin to drift. Because without them, your center collapses. That isn't failure. It's a sign that it's time to rebuild, not away from them, but beside them. Because here's a healing truth. The healthiest families are made up of whole people, not people who orbit around one another, but people who walk beside each other. Creating a life beyond your children is not abandonment. It is a gift to both you and them. When your life has texture, when it's rich with interests, friendships, stillness, laughter, discovery, you become someone your children can admire, not just rely on. They see you not as someone waiting, but as someone living. And this matters more than you may think. Because when your world is full, you don't cling, you don't guilt. You don't feel pressure. Instead, your presence feels light, inviting, open. It's the difference between a parent who says, "Why don't you call me more?" and one who says, "I just got back from my art class. I'd love to hear about your week." One comes from emptiness, the other from fullness. And fullness is magnetic. It draws people in. It awakens their curiosity. It makes them want to know you, not just respond to your needs. So what does it look like to build a new center? It doesn't mean packing your calendar with busyness. It means tuning into the parts of yourself that may have been dormant for years. What did you once love? What did you postpone? Thinking, maybe when the kids are older. What have you never dared try, but always felt curious about? Maybe it's joining a walking group. Maybe it's learning photography. Maybe it's writing your story not for anyone else, but because your life matters. Maybe it's simply sitting in the sun, drinking tea, and allowing yourself the radical act of doing nothing without guilt. The point isn't what you choose. The point is that you choose. You deserve a life that feels like yours again. Not one where you fade into the background, but one where you stand in your own light. Because the more alive you feel in your own life, the more clearly your children will see you. And when they see you, truly see you not as a role, but as a person, that's when respect begins to return. Not because you asked for it, but because you inspired it. In the next part, we'll explore a deeper, quieter power not found in words or actions, but in the simple way you carry yourself, and how that silent strength can shift the dynamic in your family more than any lecture ever could. Number 7, the silent power of presence. There's a kind of strength that doesn't need to speak. It doesn't demand attention, nor does it try to prove anything. It's the kind of strength that lives quietly in the way you sit, the way you breathe, the way you respond or choose not to. This is the silent power of presence. And as we grow older, it becomes one of the most underestimated forces we carry. You don't need long speeches to be respected. You don't need to remind your children of all the sacrifices you've made. You don't need to argue, defend, or even explain. Because the truth is, people don't remember everything you say, but they always remember how they feel in your presence. And when your presence is calm, grounded, full of quiet dignity, it changes the entire energy in the room. It doesn't matter how loudly the world moves, how quickly your children speak, or how distracted they've become. A grounded presence commands attention without ever raising a voice. But this kind of presence is not something we are born with. It's something we grow into through time, reflection, and self-respect. It is cultivated in moments when you choose stillness over reaction, when you listen without needing to correct, when you sit at the table not to prove your worth, but because you already know you belong there. This presence doesn't shout. It whispers, I am here. I am whole. I am not waiting for your validation. And that whisper is often louder than any demand. There's something undeniably powerful about a parent who no longer tries to control the conversation, but simply is attentive, open, and at peace with themselves. In this space, respect grows naturally, because people, even grown children, are drawn to those who seem deeply at ease in their own skin. And it's not because you've suddenly become more interesting, but because you've become more anchored. You're no longer chasing love, you're living from love, and that shift is magnetic. It allows you to speak fewer words, but with more weight, it gives your silences depth, not tension. It teaches those around you not by instruction, but by example that dignity is something you carry, not something you demand. And when your children witness this kind of energy, it does something quietly profound. It calls them to rise, not through guilt, not through obligation, but through admiration. Because suddenly, the parent they may have overlooked is now the one they can't stop noticing. Not because you begged for their attention, but because you became so rooted in your own presence. They had no choice but to see you differently. This is the moment where dynamics begin to shift, not with confrontation, but with calm clarity. Not with resentment, but with inner strength. The kind of strength that says, I know who I am. I know what I offer. And I no longer need to explain myself to be respected. When you live from this place, even brief interactions become richer. You're no longer reacting from old wounds. You're responding from wisdom. And that wisdom, that stillness, is a gift to your children, even if they don't recognize it right away. Because deep down, we all long to be around someone who feels safe, steady, and true. And when you embody that, you become a mirror not of who they are, but of who they can become. In the next part, we'll talk about something even more subtle: what happens inside your heart when you stop seeking approval. Stop waiting for praise and instead begin honoring your own life with every choice you make. Because when you honor yourself, the world begins to follow. Number 8. When you change, they change. There is something quietly miraculous that happens when we shift the way we carry ourselves. The world begins to shift around us, not because we force it, but because we no longer feed the old patterns. For many older parents, there is a lingering belief that the only way to earn respect is through words, reminders of past sacrifice, explanations, even correction. But what if the most powerful form of change didn't begin with them? What if it began with you? We often wait for others to change before we give ourselves permission to feel different. We think if they would only call more, I'd feel more valued. If they apologized, I could finally be at peace. If they respected me, I'd feel stronger. But these thoughts keep us stuck because they place our healing in someone else's hands. And the truth is, healing begins the moment you stop waiting. It begins when you decide to show up differently, not just in your words, but in your energy. Not with resentment, but with resolution. When you begin to shift gently, slowly, and from within, something incredible happens. Your children notice. Even if they don't say it, even if they don't understand it yet, they feel the difference. The strength in your silence, the clarity in your boundaries, the calm in your no, the dignity in your presence. And slowly, almost invisible, they begin to respond in new ways. Maybe they listen longer. Maybe they become more mindful. Maybe their tone softens. Or they pause before interrupting. It's not always immediate, and it won't always look like an apology or grand gesture, but it will be there like the first breeze before the rain, because energy is contagious. And when you shift yours, you shift the entire emotional climate of your relationships. Your children may not even realize what's changing. They may just start to feel more drawn to you, not out of guilt, but out of genuine curiosity. Not because you made demands, but because your quiet confidence invites respect. You become less reactive, more centered, less hungry for their validation, more full in your own skin. And that fullness does something rare and beautiful. It makes people want to give instead of take. It makes them reconsider how they've been showing up. It softens their resistance. Because when a parent stops over-functioning, stops over-giving, over-explaining, overreaching the child, whether they are 18 or 48 is left to sit with themselves. And in that silence, they begin to grow. This is the paradox of transformation. The more you try to change someone, the harder they resist. But when you change yourself, you become the mirror in which they see not who they are, but who they could become. That's the real influence. Not control, not guilt, not lectures, but example. You become the living answer to the very question they haven't yet asked. And that's when something extraordinary can happen. Your children may begin to shift, not because you ask them to, but because the way you live, speak, and hold yourself is too beautiful not to notice. So if you've spent years trying to fix the distance between you and your children, if you've exhausted yourself hoping they'll wake up and see you differently, let this be your gentle permission. Stop waiting for them to change. Start becoming the person you've always been: whole, worthy, enough. And watch. Watch how your change, however small, begins to create quiet ripples. Watch how the space between you and them softens. Watch how the way they speak to you slowly shifts, not because you told them to, but because you showed them how. In the next part, we'll bring all these threads together. We'll reflect on what it truly means to restore respect in a relationship, not by going backward, but by moving forward with clarity, courage, and compassion. Number 8, when you change, they change. There is something quietly miraculous that happens when we shift the way we carry ourselves. The world begins to shift around us, not because we force it, but because we no longer feed the old patterns. For many older parents, there is a lingering belief that the only way to earn respect is through words reminders of past sacrifice, explanations, even correction. But what if the most powerful form of change didn't begin with them? What if it began with you? We often wait for others to change before we give ourselves permission to feel different. We think if they would only call more, I'd feel more valued. If they apologized, I could finally be at peace. If they respected me, I'd feel stronger. But these thoughts keep us stuck because they place our healing in someone else's hands. And the truth is, healing begins the moment you stop waiting. It begins when you decide to show up differently, not just in your word, but in your energy. Not with resentment, but with resolution. When you begin to shift gently, slowly, and from within, something incredible happens. Your children notice, even if they don't say it, even if they don't understand it yet. They feel the difference, the strength in your silence, the clarity in your boundaries, the calm in your no, the dignity in your presence, and slowly, almost invisible, they begin to respond in new ways. Maybe they listen longer. Maybe they become more mindful. Maybe their tone softens, or they pause before interrupting. It's not always immediate, and it won't always look like an apology or grand gesture, but it will be there like the first breeze before the rain, because energy is contagious. And when you shift yours, you shift the entire emotional climate of your relationships. Your children may not even realize what's changing. They may just start to feel more drawn to you, not out of guilt, but out of genuine curiosity. Not because you made demands, but because your quiet confidence invites respect. You become less reactive, more centered, less hungry for their validation, more full in your own skin. And that fullness does something rare and beautiful. It makes people want to give instead of take. It makes them reconsider how they've been showing up. It softens their resistance. Because when a parent stops over-functioning, stops over-giving, over-explaining, overreaching the child, whether they are 18 or 48 is left to sit with themselves. And in that silence, they begin to grow. This is the paradox of transformation. The more you try to change someone, the harder they resist. But when you change yourself, you become the mirror in which they see not who they are, but who they could become. That's the real influence. Not control, not guilt, not lectures, but example. You become the living answer to the very question they haven't yet asked. And that's when something extraordinary can happen. Your children may begin to shift, not because you ask them to, but because the way you live, speak, and hold yourself is too beautiful not to notice. So if you've spent years trying to fix the distance between you and your children, if you've exhausted yourself hoping they'll wake up and see you differently, let this be your gentle permission. Stop waiting for them to change. Start becoming the person you've always been: whole, worthy, enough. And watch. Watch how your change, however small, begins to create quiet ripples. Watch how the space between you and them softens. Watch how the way they speak to you slowly shifts. Not because you told them to, but because you showed them how. In the next part, we'll bring all these threads together. We'll reflect on what it truly means to restore respect in a relationship, not by going backward, but by moving forward with clarity, courage, and compassion. Number 9, restoring respect without words. There's a certain kind of restoration that doesn't begin with an apology, not with a heartfelt conversation, or a family meeting, or a change of tone. Sometimes it begins with nothing but silence, but not the silence of distance, the silence of clarity. Because respect, true respect, isn't something you beg for. It isn't something you remind others to give. It's something that's awakened when you return to your own center. Many older parents believe they must have the talk to repair what's been lost. They rehearse the words. Do you realize how you've been treating me after all I've done? Is this how I deserve to be spoken to? Why don't you care anymore? But here's the gentle truth. Words spoken from pain often build walls, not bridges. They create defense. They stir up shame. They put people on edge. And more often than not, they widen the gap. But what if you didn't need to speak to be heard? What if the most powerful restoration didn't happen through talking, but through being? You see, your energy precedes your words. The way you enter a room, the way you hold your gaze, the way you take up space without apology, all of it speaks volumes, without a single sound. When you stop trying to be tolerated and start living as though you are already respected, something changes, and others feel it even if they can't name it. They feel the shift in your body language, the calm in your voice, the stillness in your presence, the quiet refusal to accept anything less than kindness, without aggression, without threat, just truth. This is not passive, it is deeply active, but it's not loud, it's embodied, because respect, in its highest form, isn't demanded, it's mirrored. When you carry it inside, others can't help but respond to it outside. Maybe your children will never apologize for past dismissiveness. Maybe they'll never acknowledge the hurt you've swallowed year after year. And maybe they won't even realize that they've begun treating you differently. But they will, subtly, gently, instinctively. Because no one can look at someone who respects themselves deeply and continue to disregard them forever. This is the quiet power of spiritual dignity. It doesn't need applause. It doesn't need recognition. It stands. And in standing, it transforms the space around it. You are not here to chase after love. You are here to embody it, not just toward others, but toward yourself. And when you do, you create an unspoken agreement with the world. This is how I will be treated. This is what I will accept. This is who I am. No words, just presence. Some people will rise to meet that energy. Others may fall away. But what remains, what lasts, is something far more precious than attention or praise. It's peace, it's quiet knowing. It's walking into your later years without the ache of being overlooked. So if you're waiting for the conversation the moment your children sit you down and say, "We're sorry, we see you now," let that go. You don't need it to begin healing. What you need is already within you, a life lived in truth, a body carried with grace, a soul no longer asking for permission to matter. That is where respect is reborn, not in the mouth, but in the mirror. And when your children see it, truly see it, they won't know what changed. They'll just feel differently around you. More thoughtful, more reverent, more aware, because you no longer come from a place of lack, but from a quiet, steady fullness. In the final part of this journey, we'll return to where we began, to the ache, the silence, the slow erosion. And we'll gather all the lessons you've now carried with you to arrive at something deeper. Not just the return of respect, but the return of you. In the quiet hours of the evening, when the world slows down and the noise fades, many older parents sit alone with a question that's difficult to name. Where did I go, not physically, but emotionally, spiritually? You gave everything, your strength, your time, your tenderness to raise your children, to nurture a family, to hold the roof over everyone's head and the floor beneath their feet. And somewhere along the way, bit by bit, you began to disappear. Not because you stopped loving, but because you stopped being seen. And that more than anything else is what this journey has been about. Not just restoring respect, but restoring you. Because respect isn't about forcing someone to look at you differently. It's about remembering your own reflection first. It's about standing up inside yourself again and saying quietly but clearly, I am still here, still whole, still worthy, still full of life, even if it looks different now. Even if they don't say it, even if they never apologize, and in that remembering that sacred act of honoring who you've always been, something begins to shift. You no longer wait for validation. You no longer chase after appreciation. You no longer beg to belong, because you've come home to yourself. That, my dear friend, is the greatest return of all. So if you've watched this video and found yourself nodding, perhaps even tearing up a little, please know you are not alone. You are one of millions of parents who gave everything without asking for anything in return. And now it is not selfish to want to feel respected. It is not unkind to want space to be heard. It is not wrong to want your presence to matter. It is human, it is natural, and it is deserved. But you must start with you. You start by no longer shrinking, by saying no when it hurts, by saying yes when it heals, by reclaiming your time, your boundaries, your laughter, your stillness. By remembering that you do not exist to make others comfortable, you exist to be true. Let your children see that truth. Let them see a parent who is not trying to be needed, but who is fully alive. Let them see a person who loves without losing themselves, who gives without vanishing, who stands without shouting. And if they do not see it at first, if they don't change overnight, let that be okay too, because you are no longer living for reaction. You are living from intention, and intention will always carry you further than approval. Now, before we part, I'd like to ask, what moment in this journey made you pause and feel something deep within? Was there a sentence, a story, a truth that felt like it was written just for you? Please share it below. I read every single comment not as data, but as real, living hearts. And your words help me continue to write for people just like you. And if this video brought you a sense of clarity, of peace, of quiet strength, please give it a like. Share it with someone who might need it. And above all, subscribe and click the bell so we can walk this journey together again. Because next time, we'll talk about what it really means to age with meaning, not just gracefully, but powerfully. And I promise, there are still many beautiful surprises ahead. You are not invisible, you are not forgotten, and you are not done. You are returning, and the world is better because of it.